So, I mean, bottom line, she's gonna speak to Karen, her PhD advisor. She's gonna try to finish it. So it'll probably be her. So she needs to agree with Karen now this week. A timeline that will put her in a position to submit her dissertation in the third or last week of January. And then she comes here, and then she
Quería
goes back
tratar
to
de ver
the
un rato la
main
presentación de la Carola. Sí, pues
will not be here there.
pero como es la primera,
Yeah, me too.
la estoy,
But the other
Me parece
hand,
que sí.
estoy
I
tratando
think it's better
de...
for us if she comes. I
Yes.
don't think it's a thing for either
Estoy
her or
pensando.
us. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you do, I mean, for data support, I mean, I simply
No,
to,
Juan tiene otra reunión.
oh, you're
Oye,
saying,
¿les mandé
uh,
el RI?
I can
¿Que
put
lo
out
investiga?
somebody
Insistir.
that stays
Vamos a ver
there
si insistimos. Veanlo, díganme
to
si es algo
Adele
inteligente o...
and
Genial. Sí. Oye, Carola, ¿cuándo llega? El 10 de enero. Ah, no queda nada. No. Está en pleno afane. Pobre. Un poquito loco. Me dijo que sí. Estaba un poquito loca. ¿Verdad? Sí, porque tiene niños. Sí. Igual el ajedrez, todo igual. Están como en mute ya parece. ¿Y llega al mismo departamento acá? Me imagino que sí. Aquí estoy en mute, menos mal. Sí, llegan al mismo departamento. A ellos le pusieron mute, yo cacho. Como no había empezado. Ya, está bien, entonces. Sí, me imagino que llega al mismo departamento. Supongo que lo desocupan los... Claro, pues tenés que pensar, y qué sé yo. Igual que Carol. No creo que vayan a causar hacer mucho. Ahí viene Carola. Ahí está. Se mete para. Mira, mira. Mira, si es que uno tiene que hacer tantas cosas. Yo veía ayer tantas cosas que por lo que me decías del comedor, cómo quedaron al sol. O sea, la verdad, tú por mucho que hayas dejado la caja cerrada, todos los meses que estuvimos, les quemó el carnil. Sí. ¿Cachai? Son unas sillas viejas. O sea, vestuario. Fina y todo, pero fíjate que van a barnizar todo. A raspar y barnizar. Sí. Toda la mesa igual. Sí. El comedor, el mueble del living, el sofá que tengo de cuero, se quemó entero. ¿En serio? ¿Por qué? No, o sea, tiene que haber sido... Que no cerraron las cortinas. presentación ahí. Supone que estamos conectados.
Que para lo de los
Sí, le mandé un WhatsApp.
enfermas,
Me dijo que estaba más tranquila ahora que... No sé qué...
¿no?
No, no tampoco. See over for the area about to access control and to chat with the presenter of Salesforce meeting and more.
No hay caso.
No hay caso. Ya, bueno. Cerramos de nuevo.
teacher is interacting with the children, and that change is reflected in the classroom and changes the children. So let's go more in depth now about creating a professional development that work. And we know that there's a lot of evidence about why professional developments don't work. Having a little echo there.
Am I listening as well?
Can people remotely please mute their phones so we don't have that echo? Thank you. So why do they don't work? Because most of the time they're provided to just give information, very unique direction, right? This transmission-oriented, one-size-fits-all, and it's not relevant for the practice. And we know that this from a big body of research, right? So how do we actually develop something that does not fall into those traps and that actually works? And so these are some of the findings that Dave Evans and team have found in their latest study about the important aspects of professional development that the effective professional development share. They provide teachers with incentives, they provide materials, they're subject specific, they provide follow-up opportunities for practice, and they also found that the training off-site was relevant for the effectiveness of the teacher professional development. There's also more research about this, prior research that also looked at effective PD in different settings, and it's also seen that it's important for it to be aligned with the system, that it focuses on teaching, on what's happening in the classroom, that involves active learning, practice, and peer collaboration. So as we are discussing and sharing with you the professional development that we're basing our work on, we'll come back to this slide and see how the work that we're doing kind of taps on some of these things, or most of these things.
I'm going to stay sitting, and I'll just rotate. So great. So I'm going to spend a little time talking now about how we've been thinking about professional development over the last 12 years at Castle. And Carolina hit on one of the things that we know about effective professional development. And as we were thinking about that, we also realized we need to think about what it is that we actually want teachers to do. And where we've landed is this idea of we want to help teachers be more intentional in their practice, to be more regularly being able to provide the types of interactions we know support children's development. And we refer to this as intentional teaching, so that teachers have the right knowledge to be able to understand what's happening in classrooms and what to do, to be able to see it both in themselves and in others' practice, to be able to then implement those, and then also reflect on what it is that they're doing and what's working and what's not. And we started to approach thinking about professional development with a parallel process, that if that was the expectation we had of teachers, then we needed to design interventions that did the same thing and really pushed on this, what we call as the know, see, plan, do, reflect model. And keep those elements central of anything we design to be at making sure we're helping support teachers to be able to do the things we think they need to do in the classroom to be most effective. And so our first intervention that we worked on with this in mind is called My Teaching Partner. It was a coaching intervention. And that the idea was to really push on the see, do, and reflect aspects of this model with a little bit of knowing and planning. And so what that means is that we would have teachers first record their practice. I love this slide because it shows how far we've come in technology in a dozen years, right? So we were innovative frontline 12 years ago with this kind of camera where teachers filmed and then they had a DV that they had to mail us and then we had to import it in live time, real time, into an iMac and to be able to edit it. But so the general idea is My Teaching Partner starts off with teachers filming their practice. Then that film goes to the coach, and they edit it in a very specific way that draws the teacher's attention to things that they're doing well and things that they need some work on. And then the prompt and the video goes to a secure website where the teacher then has an opportunity to look at their practice, think about what the coach is directing them to, and write a response. And then see good old-fashioned mediated technology here where we used iChat for the teacher and the coach to connect and talk about what it was in their practice. And part of why I want to show this old school technology is from the beginning we were thinking about how can we use technology to facilitate these processes. That way we can consider scalable models that can be replicated that weren't limited to people's location. So in this case, we were conducting this intervention in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia, but across the state, reaching teachers across the state without having to meet with them in person. And as part of the intervention, in addition to having this process ongoing throughout the school year, we coached our coaches on how to provide these elements of know and see. So here's an example of what we asked them to write in their prompts, that every single prompt should include the class dimension they were focused on, a little bit of knowledge sharing by defining what that dimension was about, then drawing the teacher's very specific attention to an observable behavior, and then prompting them to think about in that moment what was going on, all with the intention of trying to help them be a more intentional teacher around the kinds of behaviors that we know based on the class research is related to children's development. So the other thing we did to supplement what teachers were doing in observing their own practice was to create a video library of other teachers showing that practice, and provide this in a way that they could regularly go in and look at examples of the kinds of behaviors we were talking about. And what we found in an RCT, and actually in several RCTs with MTP at this point, is that for teachers who received this type of coaching, they were able to make improvements in their class behaviors, so in the kinds of behaviors we're talking about. And what's more important for this conversation is the other part that we learned from this was that we saw a wide range of variability in implementation, both at the teacher end and at the coach end. So that we saw that teachers were engaging in this intervention in different ways. Some were watching lots and lots of videos, some were not. Some were regularly showing up for their calls and engaging in this cycle process with their coach, some were not. And both of those things were related to the amount of change they made. So thinking about how could we systematize how much time they were watching other teachers teaching, and also could we figure out ways to systematize the cycles, the regularly taping and reviewing their practice with their coach. The other thing we saw, though, is even with that process, even with teachers who were regularly engaging, how much they knew about interactions going into the intervention mattered. That time spent on having to teach them about these behaviors was taking away from their ability to actually engage and reflect on that. So we wanted to think about how to do that more systematically. And then even what we noticed as our team that we thought was really tightly implementing well, we all were in one room together, regularly looking at work and thinking we were implementing the coaching intervention in the same way. We still had a lot of variation in how we were doing that, how we were following up with teachers, how we were prompting them, how we were talking to them in our conferences. And so really wanting to think about how to systematize that so we could be sure that people were getting the same intervention. And so then we were able to, with funding from the U.S. Department of Education, to think about these issues in a much larger designed trial as part of the National Center for Research in Early Childhood Education. And a couple of key things we did in this study to address some of those issues from before. First is we developed a course focused on interactions and trying to have this idea, could we teach some of that knowledge component? Could we get teachers knowing a little bit more about the kinds of behaviors we're talking about before they receive coaching? And we were, in the design, we were assigned people to either take the course or not take the course before coaching. And then we systematized the coaching process as well. So we manualized it and made it really be very clear what people should be doing and training them on that. And in this case, we also were scaling across the country. So we were implementing in 10 sites across the U.S. And so we ramped up how we were thinking about the initial training, but ongoing support to implementation fidelity. So developing systems to regularly review their work so that we could assure that at least on our end, we were doing what we could to have fidelity and quality of implementation. And so what we found is that both for the instruction in the course, which was in person, and also for the coaching, which was from distance, that when we did these regular implementation checks, what we saw is basically, what we're seeing here is no variation at the high end in terms of implementation. So at least we felt that from our end, people were doing things in the implementation phase as consistently as we thought we could with the intervention that we thought would work. And the design we set up actually allowed us to test whether the course by itself actually might have an effect on teaching practice. So we designed the course really emphasizing more of the knowledge and observing of practice with a little bit of reflection, but very little bit of that applying to their own teaching. We were really saving that for the coaching aspect, but highly interactive, engaging. And what we found was that even just from taking this course that was focused on interactions, what we saw were sizable changes in teachers' practice. And that especially in instructional support, here we're seeing mid-range effect sizes, that the instructional support is the area we see as consistently lowest across the country, across the world, and that a course focused on just helping teachers know a little bit more about these behaviors and having them observe it in other teachers' practices via video resulted in them being able to implement more of those kinds of practices in their classroom. In addition, what we found was that teachers actually really liked the course, and they found that this kind of experience got them really thinking about every opportunity in the classroom as a learning opportunity, and that they became more purposeful in the ways in which they were interacting, even though the course was not focused on their own practice, that they were able to take the ideas that they were prompted to think about and apply them to their classroom. So out of this work, there's a couple key implementation lessons that we learned. First is, if you looked at the design closely, what we ended up with was 4 different conditions. So we had a control group, we had a group that took just the course, we had a group that got just the coaching, and we had a group that had first the course and then the coaching. And what we found was that there were consistent positive effects for the course group and the coaching group, but there wasn't an additive effect of having both. And we had anticipated that there would be, because of the way in which those things seem to be pushing on different elements of their practice. And one of the reasons we think that it wasn't is because they weren't integrated very well. So you took 14 weeks of a course, and then you had a year-long coaching. And so wanting to think if there are different ways we could provide a little bit of knowledge that helps somebody take up the coaching cycle. So if we're focusing a little bit on, for example, how you give feedback and provide specific examples of that, and then provide coaching around that, would that be a better way to integrate those 2 pieces? The other key implementation aspects we gained from this work is really seeing that the emphasis on training and support of those implementers was key. That by providing that extra level of support, we were able to get a level of consistency of quality across sites that wasn't a problem because of distance. And the other real key lesson that we saw was that participants, we knew that dosage mattered, that participants participating was related to how much change they made as a result of the intervention. And that was influenced by their sense of their relationship with the people they were working with. That relationship with their coach or their instructor served as a key way to get them engaged in the intervention that then really led to the change in practice.
So now we're going to talk about the adaptation and how we went about taking this. I'd like to stand up too. So how we took this that we know has worked in the US and how do we adapt it in a way that makes sense, that's culturally relevant, and it's actually an improved version from what was already made and proved that worked in the US. And that's what we've tried to do and we'll share with you. But how do we do it? How do we go about this? So very generally, and I'll just grab this. I'll go. the first thing, we have this MTP, MMCI. MTP is my teaching partner program, the coaching, and the MMCI is the Making the Most of Classroom Interaction course. So we have these two components of this professional development. So the first part we did is, okay, we need to translate this to the context. And how do we do that? We use people that are from the region. In this case, we had a committee translate, Sarita from the World Bank, I mean from the IDB, and we had people from Costa Rica and people from Chile, everybody giving their feedback about the translation to make it appropriate. And then selecting local videos. We've learned that it's important for teachers to see videos of their classrooms. They find fascinating to see videos of the U.S., but they are like, that's not our reality. Like that's not what we have to face, which is in many cases very different. So, and it was very nice too to be able to identify in the videos all of these practices in exceptional levels too, and that's very rewarding for them too. So, selecting local videos. Then adding structure and structure in the sense of support and more like prescriptive sort of supports for the coaches, for the teachers, but also making the trainings more interactive, more participatory, so that the teachers can be more actively engaged. We pre-pilot this coaching and course components in the context of Chile. With the team there that's working in this, and with a Costa Rican group of teachers. And we continue to have conversations with them and feedback about how it was going. So as they were experimenting with this in their context with that pilot, we were learning from them too and improving. And then Sarita's going to go more into detail about this and for the context of Ecuador, but just very in general, I want to say. This is something that we need to think about as developing professional development, the selection of the coaches or mentors. If you're doing coaching, it's not the same to have anybody do the coaching. There's some thoughtful processes that need to go into that, and as well as preparation for the coaches. And then the other part is we did the delivery in person of the coaching, which is different from the US, which was online, as you saw. So, especially for the context of Latin America, we learned that was very important, that human relationship with the coach and the teacher in person seemed to matter a lot for the teachers. And also because of logistical restrictions of technology and so on. So this is the overall process we went about adapting. And now Sarita is going to share with us a little bit more specific about the Ecuador.
Yeah, I might come up here so I'm not giving my back to most of the room, but feel free to jump in. I'm also here with our project lead, Yanu Cruz Aguayo, so she might jump in as I'm talking to and give you some more details. So the Inter-American Development Bank has been working on a longitudinal study for the better part of a decade in Ecuador, and I'm just going to give you a very brief background so you kind of understand where our interest in professional development programs came from. So in Ecuador, we were really investigating kind of the early experiences of children growing up in poverty, and specifically looking at kind of the achievement gap between different gradations of poor children, very poor children, and their better off peers. And early on in the study, we were motivated by the question of, how much and in what ways do teachers impact children's learning and their experience in school. And this was also a randomized control trial. And one of the really important findings that we had is that by and large, teachers are not making a great impact on young children who come to school already far behind their better off peers over the course of the year, but that some teachers are highly effective and not only are creating large gains in math, literacy, and executive function skills in children, but between poorer children and better off classmates are closing up to a quarter of the achievement gap over the course of just one school year. So for those of us who work in education, that's really exciting because it means that education actually is a really powerful tool for self-actualization and social mobility under the best of teaching circumstances. The other finding that we had from this study, where we applied the class instrument every single year, was we knew not only that there was really effective teachers, but we knew what those effective teachers were doing because we had the class. So we knew what kinds of practices they were engaging in using the class tool and that framework to promote learning gains in children. And so, we know that the teachers can be effective, can really, change children's trajectories and outcomes. We know what those teachers are doing. And so kind of the obvious next policy question that we had is, well, let's do something with that information. What does that look like? How can we make sure that more teachers have access to that information and can implement those same kind of behaviors in their classroom? And so that was where we decided to hire the University of Virginia and put together the professional development program. Yeah, there we go. So we started out kind of going back to the scheme that Carolina has been presenting with the Snow C part of the program. So we designed a pilot where teachers would first participate in a really intensive knowledge base that would then help them throughout a year of mentoring. And so we convened 100 teachers last August who were, again, we're running the professional development pilot as a randomized controlled trial, so they were selected through a rigorous random process, and they spent 2 days learning about what effective practice looks like, watching videos from their own context, talking together, analyzing videos, doing a lot of sort of like workshop-y games to think about what effective teaching looks like and how to identify it and talk about it together. Also, teachers weren't provided any monetary incentive to participate in this program, but we were able to create some sort of prestige around it, which ended up being a really powerful incentive for teachers, knowing that it was backed by the Ministry of Education and that they specifically had been selected for a pilot that, if successful, might be implemented on a larger scale. And that turned out to be really motivating and exciting for them. So then, in addition to this kind of content-heavy piece, we started a year-long ongoing mentoring program, which is the kind of C plan and do. And so we, again, we did a kind of a randomized selection of schools in a province of Ecuador that were geographically close to each other so that mentors would be able to work with teachers from different schools on different days and not have to travel too far. And so we kind of created a universe for our sample of geographically close schools and then looked at teachers between kindergarten and third grade and ended up selecting teachers who work in second grade using a variety of different evaluations. We first asked for a peer nomination. We had school principals nominate within their school who they thought had the best qualities to be a mentor. And then we also used a really quick evaluation called Ideas About Children, which kind of looks at whether you have much more teacher-centered or much more child-centered ideas about what education looks like. So we put together a list of who we thought our top candidates were, who showed really good qualities that would make them successful mentors. And then we spent a week training them in the class instruments, so training them to be able to use this framework to think about what effective teaching looks like. And then after that class training, we selected a finalist group of 10 mentors who would each go on to work with our 100 teachers. So each mentor works with 10 teachers. We have 100 teachers total. The structure of the program is that the mentors meet every 2 weeks with their teachers, and in the intervening week, the teachers are filmed at a time and usually a day of their choosing. So they know when the filmer is coming, they can prepare for it. In fact, they're encouraged to prepare for it. And in their work with the mentors, they kind of plan what specific behaviors they think they'd like to work on. This is a strength-based program, so one of the kind of comfortable aspects of it for teachers is that they're not necessarily being asked to do something that they don't already do. They're being asked to think and reflect with their mentor about what they're doing that's effective and feel empowered about what they're already doing that's promoting learning, and then think about how to more intentionally, with greater frequency and greater intensity, do that in the following week. which seems to be a much more effective way to promote effective teaching than telling teachers what they're doing wrong and asking them to do something different. So one of the things that I think we didn't anticipate or just didn't fully appreciate as we were really focused on highly scripting content and making sure that we were faithfully implementing our program with all of our mentors and all of our teachers is what an important component helping the mentors have strong relationships with their teachers was going to be. And I think taking a step back, it's fairly intuitive. Like if you don't like the person who's asking you to do something different, then you're probably not going to work very hard at it. Or if you don't like the person you're working with on a particular professional development endeavor, it's not going to be something you're going to invest a lot of time or energy into. So it was kind of one of those moments where intuitively we realized, well, duh, but actually took a lot of planning and rethinking about how to support our mentors. And we continue to support our mentors in figuring out how to do kind of, therapy with their teachers in the sense that they're doing a lot of active listening, reflecting back emotions, I understand, kind of listening to frustrations, creating spaces every 2 weeks where teachers can just vent, which turns out to be really important. A lot of teachers feel isolated, they feel put upon, they feel maligned, they feel accused of not working hard enough, and so giving them a space where you can acknowledge those feelings and then help empower them about what they are doing well. Yeah, go ahead.
Could I ask a very good question? You said that the principals in the schools were asked to choose the mentors. Did you find that those choices before sometimes on the part of the principal?
Well, we did. We had 3 different instruments that we used. One was a peer evaluation where we asked other teachers in the school to identify the best ones. We asked principals to identify the best ones, and then we did the perception about children. So we kind of had to triangulate between the 3. But yeah, I would definitely say that there's not always a direct lineup between who teachers would go to for advice or help and who principals would point to. And that's actually another interesting point that we've also had to work a lot with directors. We, realized that we can't just kind of, send directors a card from the ministry being like, we're going to be working with your teacher, thanks for your support, and call it a day, but that it's also been an ongoing support to or ongoing work to, not in a belittling way, but I guess massage their ego is not the right word, but to make sure that they feel like that they're doing something important by allowing their teacher to participate in this, but also making sure that they're not interfering, that they're allowing their teacher a space to be able to meet with their mentor.
There's a question.
Yes. Yeah.
So did the mentors receive any training beforehand?
Yeah, so
we
the
have
mentors,
a couple slides coming up about that.
That's a really good question. The mentors definitely received a week-long intensive training, which actually isn't that much training. A week is, go ahead.
What about the teachers?
Yeah, the teachers started out with a 2-day workshop, and then they receive a little bit of content every 2 weeks with their mentors.
So
the mentors,
sorry? They trained on class?
Yeah, on class. Mm-hmm. It's a program called Making the Most of...
So the teachers were not trained on class coming into this, but part of what the training is in those 2 days is around those behaviors.
It's a class-based framework. And it's a good point. The mentors only have a week of training, and one of the things, as we've been worrying about scalability is, we could probably spend a year training our mentors so that they are so highly trained, that they are agile and nimble in the field, that they can, in any situation be creative and problem solve and, individualize their attention. And kind of at the expense of that and making sure that all of our mentors were implementing the same sort of program with the teachers, we chose instead to support them throughout the school year and then kind of highly script the ways in which they were interacting with the teachers during the meetings and provide them ongoing support.
Just a quick question. You mentioned principals, and some of the countries we work with in small schools, like multi-grade schools, that have principals that are actually teaching. Mm-hmm. So in those situations, I don't know if you had that in Ecuador or worked with any small schools like that, but to integrate the principals actually into the training program as well. Did you?
Yeah, we actually, in our sample, we're not working with any schools that are so small that the principals are also giving classes.
But I would like to add something to that we're learning as we're applying, that it seems to be really important, the principal buy-in into the program and knowledge about it too. In this study, the principals are not part of it. They're not taught about the class framework, partly because too we don't want to contaminate the sample, and we want to kind of keep the teachers as contained as possible. But having said that, we are acknowledging the fact that If the principal is not involved, it gets a little hard for the teachers. Sometimes there's a little bit of jealousy or like what's going on in there, that you're having all this attention and we're kind of left out. So we are seeing that it's going to be important to get them involved a little bit more.
So just back to the kind of the tenets of what good professional development or effective professional development looks like and how it aligns with what we're doing. In terms of incentives, again, teachers, there's a little bit of prestige around their participation. They know that they're doing something new and innovative, but not just kind of like the next newest, greatest, whatever thing that the ministry is throwing at them, because they also know that what they're doing isn't so, attached to a particular curriculum that it's not going to serve them next year when something else new comes in. So they know that in terms of incentives that this is a real tool that might be very valuable to them for the long run. We provide all the materials for the teachers and for the mentors, so they don't have to on their own come up with anything to be able to participate. It's not a particularly material heavy program, but they have a dimension guide, they have a binder. In terms of follow-up, the mentors are working ongoing throughout the entire school year, so this is not a one-off kind of experience. The teachers know that the mentors are there supporting them for the long haul. They're not going anywhere. And the mentors also have our support throughout the year, so there's definitely this ongoing relationship. Practicing, teachers have an opportunity every week to practice something new, not something drastically new, but just a really concrete, small interactions to think about how to do them more intentionally, more effectively. And then training in an offsite location, we trained all of our teachers and mentors in an offsite location, which turns out to be important that you don't have your director or your direct supervisor there kind of watching how you're behaving yourself. And so teachers feel like they're in a space where they can take risks, where they can ask stupid questions, where they can participate in ways that maybe they are not always comfortable doing. We're working this, we didn't put it in black. One of the things that we've realized in the last couple months is that we want to make sure that we help teachers make a direct connection between the goals that the ministry sets out for them and then the ways in which the project is asked them to be more effective. Because for them to feel comfortable doing what we're asking them to do, they need to see that this is not, it doesn't go against what they're being officially kind of graded on by the ministry. It's focused directly on their teaching. We're not talking about grand theories of education or child development, but really about what you are doing right now, right here with these kids in your classroom. Again, the active teaching and learning component, I think we've touched on that. Peer collaboration, teachers, the group of 10 teachers who work with a mentor, they all have WhatsApp group together, so they have been able to support themselves. They send messages when someone doesn't have a lesson plan, little things like that. Other teachers have kind of come in and helped them, so there's this kind of network of peer support that almost organically came up through the project that we didn't anticipate. It's happened. And then just this follow-up and continuous feedback. Not only are the teachers getting continuous feedback from their mentors, but also we're in touch with them to make sure that things are working, that things that are not working are being addressed in a timely manner, that they feel heard, and that we're all kind of learning together and refining this as we go along. So just to dive a little bit more into the ways in which we're supporting the mentors in their work, we ran them through this pretty intensive week-long training, but that's not the end of it. That was kind of the beginning of the ways in which we support them. We call the mentors every week and ask them how they're doing. They frequently, when they watch videos of their teachers, they write a set of, we call them prompt questions or reflection questions, and they frequently send their questions to us to review them, say does this look okay? And we give them, a quick overview and either tell them you know what, that second one does not make a lot of sense, or I think those look fantastic, it looks like your teacher's doing great work, but just so that they continue to have reassurance, and also we continue to have an idea that what they're doing with their teachers is what we expect of them.
I wanted to add something more to that too. So we said, as Sarita said, right, we're focusing on strengths. We're not telling the teachers this is what you're doing wrong, you need to do right. But then you might be asking yourself, but then how do you move them to where those areas they're not doing so well, right? And what we do is that we are training their ability to identify and observe. So rather than us telling them, we are trying to guide them towards themselves, identifying where they can continue to improve. And part of that work is getting the coaches better at doing that, which is hard because it's not something that you develop very fast or in one time. So that's why we have sort of this intense, tired levels of support for the coaches. And we really see the coaches too as part of the intervention in the sense that they are receiving their intervention as well. Like they are receiving a professional development that it's ongoing as well, led by the facilitators.
Yeah. So we have bi-weekly meetings with the mentors. The mentors pretty much, they have a fairly isolated job. They meet every day with the teacher and have a meeting and then, send kind of a report back to us. But other than that, they don't have a lot of chance to all get together and talk about what's going on, refine, some content issues. So every 2 weeks, we meet via Skype with all of the mentors and we go through kind of in depth the content that they're currently working on with the teachers. We answer questions, we problem solve, we look over, some form that doesn't have enough space somewhere and we fix that for them. So things from really little kind of logistical organizational stuff to much more conceptual stuff. We work on them with them every week. We also have a coordinator on the ground who's in touch with them every day. Sometimes the school is locked or like the teacher broke her foot. What do we do? And the coordinator will take their immediate call and pass it to us, and then we can go, through the ministry or talk to, our support. Yeah.
Hi, Sarita. So when they are meeting every 2 weeks, when you say that we are providing support, who are the people exactly providing support?
Carolina, myself, and then our colleague.
So it's the IADB team and CASEL combined?
It's a mix of CASEL and IADB.
So it's a mixture of IADB
and our coordinator on the ground in Ecuador, Sophia, who's also there, and is a fundamental.
She's like the first contact person. So whatever thing that they need, they go to Sophia, and then they have this more like higher level conversations about the content with Sarita and Fran every week about the prompts they're writing, and then every 2 weeks we have this larger group call. We all get together.
And web mediated, right? So they're there together. They come together into a space there in Ecuador, and we Skype in our team from DC and Charlottesville.
And again, just kind of back to the part about relationships, we realized that in the same way that we really need to support the mentors in establishing kind of the warm, fuzzy part of the project, which actually turns out to be the most central part, in establishing warm relationships with their teachers, we also are kind of therapists to the mentors. Frequently at the end of the day, they need to call us and say, like, that was so hard, my teacher was so crabby, she was in such a bad mood, like, she blamed everything on me, and then, and for them to be able to spend, an hour or two with the teacher kind of receiving all that negativity and then maybe, getting to the content part, then they tend to pass that upwards onto us. So it also has turned out to be a really important job just for them, the mentors also to have some emotional support and to be able to kind of call and just be listened to. Okay. Do you want to say?
Just this slide is just to emphasize, this parallel process where facilitators support coaches in a way that's aligned with how they are supporting the teachers and how we are also asking the teacher to treat the children. So when we say it's important to have a positive climate, we are kind of modeling that positive climate. The coaches are modeling the positive climate, and we expect the teachers to do it. And we keep that very present in the work we do, sort of like each image.
And we make that explicit with them too. There's no part of this that's behind like smoke and mirrors. Like we talk to them about how, we're trying to model the same kind of behaviors that we're expecting that they model with the teachers.
You kind of already talked about this, but it's more about the coaching of the training of the coaches, which we wanted to highlight the importance of this and how we made it interactive, and they actually had an opportunity not just learn the content, identify behaviors in videos, but also to plan, do, and reflect. It was very interactive, and the coaches were presenting material, etc.
And again, that parallel process. We know that if we're telling mentors that teachers don't learn by just like sitting and passively watching a PowerPoint, that we can't do the same thing with them. We need that they're also participating and engaging with the marked material. So we had them, do all sorts of activities, and also simulate meetings with their mentees so that they were actually practicing over the course of a couple of days, the kind of things that they were then going out into the field to do.
These are some of the supports we were providing them. So we have the structure of the coaching there across in that table. So the week 1, this is what you do. The teacher's going to be recorded. The mentor's going to be writing questions and selecting video. Week 2, the teacher and the mentor meet, and they talk and they come up with a plan. And then we had a cycle form, which we call is this format where they kind of fill in their conversation and their planning. And then there's a video library that they can use to kind of refresh their minds about what are these behaviors.
Yeah, and this is another kind of fidelity and implementation tool that the mentors go into a meeting with a form that really guides them step through the meeting. You know, ask the teacher about how she's doing, and then, you know, are there any, you know, issues you need to address, any problems she's having, and it kind of just goes step by step through the meeting so that they aren't like left out on their own if they're unsure where to go next. And so then just kind of the summary of what we've been talking about, we've designed this as a randomized control trial. We're currently working with 10 mentors who are meeting with 100 teachers. At this point, we're going on probably 700 coaching visits. We're actually, the really exciting thing is that mentors are really seeing change in the way their teachers are thinking about how they engage in the classroom and actually what they also do. And we'll get together in February with all of the teachers again to do a second kind of part of content so that they'll learn more about this class framework, and the dimensions that they learn about in February will be the ones that from February on out they're working on with their mentors. So when they start working with their mentors on behavior management, it's not the first time they've ever seen the material, but they're familiar with what it is about, and they can start thinking actively about how to do it in their classroom.
Just a question. So far, they have been working in the overall, or they have been working in a specific domains of class?
Very specific. Yeah.
Dimensions.
They spend a couple weeks. There's 10 dimensions. We don't do negative climate because we don't want them to model negative behaviors, but they spend between 2 and 3 cycles working on the same dimension. So they have a couple of opportunities to try different behaviors within positive climate, teacher sensitivity, regard for child perspectives. So it moves through the range of class behaviors throughout the school year.
So it's about a month to a month and a half per dimension set of behaviors. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm conscious that it's so I guess it's up. How would you like to proceed? Would you like us?
Can you wrap it up in 5 minutes or so?
Sure. So I'll just briefly talk about our current work that's happening in Kyrgyzstan just at a high level, and at the same time we've been doing this incredible work of partnering with IDB and learning lots about implementing the intervention there. We've also been working with the World Bank in understanding their new project in Kyrgyzstan, the KEEP project, the Kyrgyz Early Education Project, where they've implemented the kindergarten year countrywide, and we partnered with them to study the quality of the implementation. And one of the things that we've been able to do as part of that is develop a really rich set of data collectors and experts in class there to be able to gather the measurement around using the tool. And what we've found, of course, is like many countries now, we see the same pattern of variability and interactions across the country. And that's really, given the work we've been doing with them over the last few years, has really become a very key talking point about where they want to intervene. And so out of this project of observing quality in the country, we are starting now to think about how can we take some of the lessons we've learned in some of these other projects and apply them to now thinking about changing practice. And one of the great things that's come out of having to train a bunch of high data collectors is that we have a lot of rich resources now in their from their classrooms in their language that we can build from. We don't have the same amount of resources in terms of videos available ahead of time and some of the resources that we've talked about that really worked for Latin America, but we're working here within what we have, and that we're able to take what we're working on now is taking some of the activities we've learned that are really helpful and interesting to help teachers learn this material and add that into the class training material to make it be engaging and interactive for teachers, pushing on the same components of teaching them about these and helping them see the types of practices we're talking about. Also, that's one of the things that's already in place in the Kyrgyz Republic is that they have a coaching model, and they have coaches at least, but this conversation has helped them start to think about what do they need to be doing differently to make those coaches be more effective and actually leading to change in practice. So we're taking some of the key principles that we've learned and starting to think about how to integrate it into their system. I'm gonna skip these slides, and you come back to them in a minute. Let me just talk, and then I can go back to this. Given, I started with saying we always are trying to push on technology innovations, and as we all know, the world is moving very fast in this space. I just want to show one or two slides, one or two new ideas that we're doing with technology. One of the things we did, teaching in-person courses takes a lot of resources. It's less resource intensive than coaching, but it's still resource intensive. So we've been working on putting lessons online in interactive ways that actually help to promote learning. And keeping in mind the same idea that we're working on teaching, we're also working on helping teachers coach themselves, so setting up activities that take the coach out of it and help them focus on their teaching practice and reflect in important ways. And what we find is that teachers actually do participate, so this is just over time. They were actually going to an online course. They find it useful. And most importantly, in this case, this course was focused on emotional support and classroom organization that actually led to change in practice. So being able to scale up in a way that was really still leading to changes in practice. We took part of that and put it on up into a MOOC in Coursera. We put about 4 weeks worth of lessons on there. And this really obviously then scales us in a whole new way. So we had 9,000 people initially sign up for the course. 4,000 completed. So with really almost no resources to have that be running, we saw people participating and changes in knowledge, at least as a result of participating. The thing that I'm most jazzed about these days is thinking about what we're learning from health interventions and the wide-scale use of mobile technology. How can we take some of these lessons and these same key ideas and push them out to teachers through mobile technology? So one of the things we've been working on is how do we take these video lessons and make them more user-friendly for mobile devices, things like taking words out and people out and really having the video and a video analysis be the key aspect of the teaching. What this does from my end is actually make it really appealing internationally, because all we need then is we have the script, we just need somebody to do the voiceover in a different language, and now we are able to change interventions to work in different places with really minimal resources. And yet we're still pushing on, given what we're learning in the nudge intervention world, we're still pushing on these same ideas of helping people get the right knowledge of the kinds of practices we think should be happening, pushing them to try them out, and providing minimal coaching that's from afar that really keeps our reduction of resources needed with being able to scale up things that work.
Okay, so very, very briefly, here are some things, some lessons from all this work. So first thing is collaboration. It's so important to partner with the local capacity, build on what's already there, engage people. Training, it's very important to think about training in a very detailed way, to think about training of coaches if you're doing coaching in ways that remove barriers and that are standardized. And then implementation, think about supports for implementation success seems very, very important. And thinking of coaches as a community of learning and continuing assessing how things are going and making those adjustments as we go. So that's what we had for today. Sorry that we ran over the time a little bit.
Thank you very much. So, Ezequiel, what do you think?
I'll try to do it faster so we have a bit more time for discussion. Thanks you guys for coming. I mean, this began like we had an opportunity because Carolina was going to be in DC, and really all the material that you cover from the Ecuador project to what the Kyrgyzstan to kind of this online, like the nudges intervention that I've actually didn't know about, I think is super useful from our point, because as I said, usually in these BBLs we have a paper, we have the Brazil intervention or another intervention in South Africa, and it's a bit more on the economy side, which is great. But I think kind of getting to the details of how these things work is actually something that we don't know enough, and it's very useful. I mean, just I was in a Latin American country a couple of weeks ago talking about their professional development program, and we went to observe a school, and the trainer was telling the teacher, a sixth grade teacher, to read a whole chapter of Eric Hobsbawm, The Age of Extremism. I don't know if you ever read this book, but this, Eric Hobsbawm is very famous, so he has a lot of books on history. And the idea of the trainer was for this teacher to read the whole chapter to get an idea of what is the total war. This is a concept that could have been summarized from the trainer in like one sentence, but now this teacher had to read the whole thing, and the actual professional development was how to improve doing sequence. So it's actually not related at all what the professional development was, and I think that's not only what happens in this particular country, but it happens a lot, that we have a lot of very capable people as trainers, but they may not be focusing on the things we know matters. And I think this comes from the work that we are doing, in the WDR that just come out from the Education Global Practice, on trying to understand why, we spend so much money on professional development, and when we go and look at the schools in Africa or in South Asia, or in many of these countries, we see no learning at all going on, and we see that the sort of professional development that teachers receive focus much more on the lecture, on these sort of things that we know won't have an effect. And as part of the bank, we are now thinking how we can improve this. And this starts with thinking about first how to measure effective teaching practices in the classroom, and then thinking how we can make sure that our professional development programs take this into account to leverage that learning that we already know that the evidence gap is pretty big. So I think for this is very, very useful, and I will point to some questions that I have also from this angle, from the idea that we are really thinking of how to develop a professional development based on having better measures of what happened in the classroom. So one of my questions was that my understanding was that class was first developed as an analytical tool, not before it was a professional development tool. So my one question is, what are the changes that your team did as a result of going from research more to professional development? Then one thing that I found, yesterday there was Erica Boulway from Uncommon Schools, and they are the people that write Teach Like a Champion on this. And one of the things that they do in their professional development program is they have this see, name, do. So the idea that they name the practices that they see, and they have kind of techniques. So, for example, if you want to improve check for understanding, you have 3 or 4 techniques that you need to learn on how to do it. And my question was whether, from what I see in the presentation, it seems to be that you have videos of teachers doing good practice in a given domain or a given construct, but I'm not sure whether you thought of identifying techniques within domains, or is something that you already do, or you thought maybe and decided against that. But that would be interesting, because at least from the point of view of when I was thinking about this, it's like, oh yeah, it seems easier if I give you a specific technique rather than I show you like a teacher doing something great, but I don't really know how to emulate that teacher. And the other question was, and I think you discussed in the case of Ecuador, of the scripted lessons, I think. So whether there are other complements aside from this, from using the classroom observations to provide feedback, that goes together to make the professional development program. And my final question is more on how much do you think this could be, both of the countries that you've worked are relatively much more developed than our average country. And one of the problems that we have is, you describe the recruiting process of the mentors and how you did that. And I think in our case, many times we work with the government, and even the best people that could be mentors within the government may not have the skills of the people that you are trying to reach. So if you thought about that and whether there is any way that that be improvement. Sorry, my final is there is a bit of a research that Svetlana has already left, but on the biases that teachers have, and one of that biases, at least in the research that they found, is that even when teachers are absent all the time or are doing things that don't have the content knowledge that they should have, they seem to be thinking that that's not the case, and they justify that on many other things. And hearing you talk about how you try to persuade, let's call it, or try to change the frame of mind, I was thinking whether you face this sort of situation of teachers saying like, I'm doing a great job even though the tool is telling you otherwise, and how you think you go about it, because you don't, from what I understand, you don't want to tell them but there may be a need to be bring some objective information into to that, but of course it would be, I don't know how you would handle the communication except, but I think I'll stop at that and I can more questions later.
We got 3 hours to.
Those are great questions.
Yeah. Okay. Let's open. Let's open up. Same.
Yeah. At the beginning you mentioned reducing the gap by 1/4. I was waiting for another slide in order to show what was the effect, the impact of all of these things. So and it is also of importance to know, because you were training them on the domain by domain. So were you measuring also student learning after you coach them on the domain?
Yeah,
we don't need to do the whole thing. We just 1 or 2 domains that are most important. They produce the best results. We focus on them.
That was actually a result from our longitudinal work. So that was just finding that teachers who are already effective, not teachers who have participated in this program, but teachers who we've been following for the last 6 years.
You mean the previous one,
right?
The Gate
yeah,
Foundation?
we don't have.
No, the Ecuador.
From Ecuador. We don't have results yet from mentoring because we just started in September. But what part of what that came out of was our finding from the longitudinal study that effective teachers were closing the achievement gap within the course of a year by 1/4. And so what we were hoping to do is if we could make all the teachers effective or more effective, then we could at least close the achievement gap by 1/4 among all children and maybe more, if that makes sense. So
it's not related to the experiment.
It's the study that's the precursor to the experiment.
Oh, I was hoping it is.
Yeah, no, we don't have results yet.
We'll let you know the results.
Yeah.
Just add one more. So a couple things to so one is in each case we've been able to do an observational study. We have U.S. observational studies before the intervention. We have now Ecuador, Kyrgyzstan, and the change has been we did developmental studies using class as a research tool. So even though our frame has changed to professional development, the behaviors are the same. The way in which class, for example, says that you're looking for saying positive relationship elements that are very specific behaviors that would score high, that we know is related to children's development. The coach then says to the teacher, it's not about the score, it's about those behaviors. So notice here how you're getting down on the children's level and smiling at them. What do you see the impact on the children? So that's the shift of we don't have the manual out, we just have those behaviors that then become the focus.
And that's also what our techniques are in terms of really specific techniques for teachers. We talk at the level of behaviors. We say when you asked an open-ended question, that was a fantastic opportunity to promote, deep thinking in the child. So we're still using the same kind of, technique as the word that you use.
Just very quick follow-up on this. Do you have baseline learning outcome data from the students so you can you do a similar test of student learning outcomes with this group, or is it going to be you're looking at changes in teacher behavior?
Right, this is our pilot year, so we're looking at teacher behavior changes.
With the intention to collect student data at some point in the future, in the Ecuador project.
Yeah, probably for the following year.
But you won't be collecting data on the changes to learning in the student learning for this group.
Well, we may, I mean, because it's a randomized control trial and we have a treatment group, we may at the end of the year, depending on what our resources are, like collect achievement data for the two groups.
And in the so just to go back into the U.S. studies, what we do have is data on those children in those studies, and we do see not just the change in the teacher practice, but we see it actually as though, and then we also see the change in children's development.
And hopefully we'll be able to collect that data.
Yeah.
And the 0.25 just is from a variety of studies that, or is from one?
It's from Closing Gaps, the Ecuador.
Yes, so I think, I mean, they do have in their paper the kind of the ability of all the teachers, and they randomize with what teachers go to each school. So the best teachers are able to get much better learning outcome, but it's not an intervention of improving teachers per se.
Right. It was really just a longitudinal study. But we know that the best teachers were not also excellent on class. So even the best teachers could improve much, which suggests that students could also.
I'm going to propose that since we don't have that much time, that we collect the questions and then we can answer in a group by topic.
I saw that the recording is on YouTube, right?
The one
is
that
public accessible by everybody?
So that we are just in the initial stages. Oh, sorry, we're just in the initial stages. But that's part of what our thinking is that we will actually create a YouTube channel that then
so if you
we can
tell us
then we can text
the link that we can look. We will have a better idea.
We're just working on that, but I can show you that link. But it's a 3-minute video. The idea is it's a 3-minute short video that highlights the practice in a way that is easily sent out via text message versus having to have teachers go to an app or a website that it actually gets more the chance of getting viewed if it goes that way.
Because the related question is whether, if everything is on public accessible and the teacher may have resistance to do that, because no matter how good you are, maybe some people will criticize you. And they say, this is not good, I don't like that. And I don't know if you have any feedback from parents.
Are you saying public teachers, public videos of teachers teaching? Is that what you?
Yes. Yeah.
It would be a YouTube channel that you'd have to subscribe to.
Right.
So just to be clear, those are ones that we've had consented for public use that serve as examples, as positive examples. Ones that we would have teachers share in terms of getting coached on, those would go via a private route, and those would not be public access. I mean, that's how we work. Yeah, for this they haven't consented.
We haven't gotten feedback from parents. It's considered normal teacher.
I have 2 quick questions. One is about this behavior change. You posit this ideal of teaching, but in some of the countries we work in, the ideal is very different. In some countries, learning is suffering. And so my question is, I know this is just a pilot, but have you faced resistance from either other teachers who are not part of it, or parents, or school principals, and great society in general? Because that's one of the problems I'm facing in one of my countries. And then the second question is a logistical question very quickly. You're only doing 2 pilots, but if you were solicited to do more, for example, with me, how are you going to create, how are you going to deal with this? Have you thought about that? Like if this expands, because this is potentially very interesting work.
You want to collect the rest of the questions?
You.
Yeah, let's collect the question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question to what the respondent, what Simon just asked you, whether you have experience of a starting point where it's a heavily sort of teacher at the front of the class, rote memory.
That's our starting point.
And you've made inroads into that environment. I think that would be extremely important to lift out and be very, very explicit about how you got started, because that would speak to a lot of the situations that we're in partnership with countries about. And the other thing linked to that, briefly, is that in some of the work that we're doing, we see that there is an interest in competence-based curriculum, reform for competence-based curriculum, which comes with it, UNESCO is heavily encouraging countries to get into this as well. And we're seeing as the countries get into this, they, it's not only a content thing, but it's kids moving around and teachers engaged more in the classroom as well. But it's just so many of the chairs moving around, and they're not, we're not really sure if there's learning. So would that kind of wave, if you will, be something that you are already attached to help make the reforms for this competence-based curriculum a little bit more effective in terms of true learning in the classroom? Because it should have an element of formative assessment, of course, that goes with it, etc.
Okay. Any final questions? If not, then also, please don't forget there's a close course. We'll start there. And then if I could get your names really quick. Simon. Okay. And Susan.
So just a general comment that
University of Virginia alum.
Oh. So we like to think that resistant teachers are not present in the U.S., but guess what? We the reality is we see these patterns every country we go. We see resistant teachers, we see directive teachers, we see willing teachers, we see willing parents, we see the things that I've continually am struck with is that there are some international themes that happen in this space. Another one is that people say, oh, well, the example of like regard for student perspective. Oh, you'll never see child-centered in this country, or you'll never see teacher-directed in this country. We see the range. Wherever we go, if you think back to Carolina's slide of the published studies in different countries, there's a range of these behaviors, and some teachers are doing them well and effectively, and some are not. So that gives us at least some signal that, there is room here for teachers to be doing things differently. From my perspective, the key to doing it in places that are different from us, even in the U.S., but definitely when we go in other places, is to have amazing partners who know the country, know the places where we're going, have the resources to make this happen in those places. Know that we know ministry being involved and saying that is going to open doors in ways that we certainly as researchers wouldn't be able to do otherwise. That's part of why I love my picture of Kyrgyzstan too. It's like here I am at the parliament with the ministry folks, because that is how it happens. And so I think we have been really aware of that as we've gone into new places, and I think the key to the successful implementation that's happening right now that may we're hoping actually leads to practice change, but it's because of that partnering early that has made it be acceptable to the country in a way that seems like it has a chance to work. I don't know if you all have stuff to add.
No, I guess it's just about we have had a really long relationship with the government of Ecuador, so they actually see this pilot as something that belongs to them. So there's a lot of ownership from them, and they want to use the results of this pilot to inform national policy. So in that sense, they have always been there. There's a lot of communication with parents, with principals, with teachers, and that communication is not only the IDB and our team of researchers, but the IDB plus the Ministry of Education. So I guess it's a lot of just making sure that they're on board, and it's not only like a tiny little pilot that is happening there, like something tiny and cute, but something that is going to be very useful for them.
Now, I would like to pick up on the part of the question about the resistance on the behavior change beyond the resistance of the program itself. And I think I want to acknowledge that exists, and we all know that as we go into different cultures, it's difficult to come with a proposal of now you need to let your children move around the classroom or give their opinions every time they want. The teachers are whoa, this is going to be chaos, and they're scared of the change. And we've faced that. We've seen that in the classrooms, in their teacher comments, and they're scared. But the coaches, the mentors have been wonderful at kind of pointing them back at their strengths and taking baby steps and not getting overwhelmed. But it's certainly a perspective or paradigm change really on how they're teaching. So it is ambitious in that sense, and we're aware that parts of the class, especially the regard about students' perspectives and some things about behavior management, are culturally complicated or polemic, right? Because in some cultures, very frontal, as you were saying, learning is kind of suffering, right? You just have to be quiet and be there. But we have enough evidence from this line of research that we would feel comfortable telling them, like, we know we're telling you to do this because we know this works. And at the end of the day, you will see that this will make things easier for you as a teacher and for the children. And as they've started practicing these things and putting them in practice, they are seeing the results in the classroom. The children are buying more into being there. They feel more comfortable. They want to participate. So they are seeing their change, and that's the reward in itself. So they are wanting to do this because they see that the results in the classroom. But I mean, it is difficult. I don't want to say,
the teachers
like,
that are like really like, yeah, like let's do this. Like those, we don't really need to help those teachers that much. I mean, most of our teachers are like, yeah, I already do everything fantastically. And honestly, those are the teachers we need to work with, and that's what most of our teachers work. Though that's not an exception of the rule. That's really like that's our population of teachers.
And so, to your point, though, that's part of the training we provide to mentors on ongoing of what do you do with people who are ready for change? What do you do with people who are resistant to change? It's an intentional part of what we focus them on.
And it's one of the nice things about the strengths-based model because, again, we're not asking teachers to do something foreign to them. Even the worst teachers have effective moments, and, you know, worst is a bad descriptor, but all teachers at some point are doing something that's effective, and if you can help them see, just start really small, find those moments, think about how to do them more intentionally, and keep building on that. I think it's much easier than telling teachers to do something totally foreign.
So one of the things that really took me one of the things that really captured me when I learned about your coaching method was when we were in Charlottesville, and there was this scale of teacher readiness.
Yeah.
So there's a scale of teacher readiness, and then depending on the readiness of the teacher,
that's where you meet them.
That's where you determine what you will raise up, what type of, how you will even word your prompt, and how you'll show sensitivity to the teacher's ability to even receive the feedback. And that, yeah, from there on out, I was really very taken with your approach entirely.
Yeah. So kind of trying to see if I have any other questions here that we haven't picked on. But so the curriculum aspect. So these practices that the class focuses on, these teacher-child interactions, are things that are transversal. And we kind of reminded teachers that as they're doing this, that's going to support the implementation of the curriculum better. So we haven't seen like this going against each other in any way, and we're confident that this will support the implementation of their curriculum. And you might have had something more specific about that.
And I'll just add my ongoing experience. I'm sure it's true for all of you too, which is there's so much asked of teachers all the time, and new initiatives and all this. And part of what we are pushing on is to scale all that back and say, like, this is because we want you to focus on this specific behavior, because we know if you do that behavior more often, that's really what's going to lead to positive behavior change. The part of what we've had to say to the coaches is always, because the coaches want to be like, I got 27 things for you to do different. And that's just, we know that's not consistent with what causes behavior change. We know, that's right, we're going to measure all of them, and we're going to say, here's your sheet, and figure out what to do. So part of what we do want to put all the initiatives and all those things and curricula and all, because there's so much on the table, we want to help people manage that. But really what we are focused on is, you know, if you can look at how you ask this open-ended question and look at the response from the child, and he's talking more and really letting you know how he's learning. If they can do that, and if they can focus on that, that's a real thing that they can tangibly change and start doing more of. And we know you don't have to be doing that all the time to have positive change on kids' development. If you can just do it some of the time, so we can move somebody from never doing it to some of the time, we're going to see that positive impact on kids.
And to the bias, those teachers that think, oh, I'm doing everything fine, we try to point them at, okay, let's look at the children. What happens when you do this? What are the children doing? How could you get that child a bit more engaged? What else could you do if you're already doing everything else? What else?
Or like, that was a fantastic, job you did right there. What more do you think you could do to do that more often or more frequently?
Yeah, there's a lot of like psychology and reflective listening that are skills that we've seen that are central to kind of the success of the coaching.
And you've been able to point to evidence in terms of actual learning achievements over time, whether connected with TIMS or Pearl or whatever, because that might be a little bit convincing also.
The 2 impact evaluations that were done by Pianta and et al. In 2011 and also 2015, there's a replication study looking at secondary mathematics. Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's. I go back to 2 bodies of research. One is the slide that Darlene showed earlier, which is there's many published studies showing at least small effects of class to child outcomes. The Ecuador study specifically that Sarita talked about, but we also have one that's published in China. We have that show the relationship between these behaviors and child outcomes. And then we also have several studies that are the professional development that improves the teacher behaviors, and in some of those studies that you also have child outcomes. So those 2 together is what we're putting our money on, is that we're getting some signal on these behaviors and we can move these behaviors. And so as we push in other places where there's more data, then we'll be able to say more about those things together.
Yeah, and the idea with Ecuador is that at the end of the first year we'll measure some changes in teachers' behavior, and at the end of the second year we'll measure achievement, learning in math, language, and executive function for achievement.
And that's partly, what we know is that it takes a while for behavior to change. So yes, we hope kids are improving and getting more of a positive experience in this first year, but really thinking, giving the teacher more time to actually have time to change their behavior before we really can see much of a way to children's development.
And just one other thing, sometimes people focus on the instructional support domain because they know that has the biggest impact on student achievement. But the focus on the emotional support domain is what gives you a lot of impact on socio-emotional and child development outcomes, which especially for countries that are fragile conflict countries where students are under duress, that can actually impede their ability to learn. And so when you're able to focus across both emotional support and instructional support, it really yields that benefit as a holistic tool. So it's something else to keep in mind.
Yeah, so to your point, which is that one of the Pianta and Hamre early findings was that for kids who came in with problem behaviors, it was the emotional support they received based on class was related to academic gains. So that kids who had problems but had that more sensitive and responsive teacher, actually you could see the academic benefits from that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry to zoom over your slides.
No, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Very,
very interesting.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
So glad it worked out.
you drove all the way from Charlottesville. Thanks for coming.
No, it's great to be here. And I know too bad we didn't have more time to hear about other projects going on that you all are thinking about maybe another time.
Yeah, no, definitely. Then, because as I said, we, now we have a lot of projects that are actually trying to improve professional development in several ways. And many of those are trying to come up with sort of class motivation as well as feedback on that class motivation. And what we as a global knowledge unit, we want to make sure that we provide, rather than each of them having a different consultant that takes you in a different position, sort of investing on having something that is useful across and that and that can be replicable, at least adaptable for other contexts. So I think it is very useful. And as I was saying, like even the parts of you guys are already thinking about how to set it up in an easier way, even though we don't know the potential problems of all of these things that we were saying, but at least having that vehicle that could complement, if they have the resources to do a more formal one or not, and one could try to see whether that is helping.
That's right.
I think that is, that will be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we're not interested in doing something that is some boutique thing that just works under these conditions. We're always trying to think about how could this work in different places and maintain the things we're learning that actually seem to matter.
It's packaged.
Yeah, no, I was telling you, Michael Crawford is the global lead for curriculum instruction and assessment within the curriculum of PACA. I was saying that we have a lot of projects that are trying to improve professional development upcoming on the pipeline, and that we are trying to see what would be a way that is not like each of them having a different consultant, kind of ways of way, but
I think
schedule, or you
between yesterday's discussion and today, what Omar was saying about.
Well, we are. I mean, I'm a staff at KIDB.
Complications,
also
coming to some sort of first order things that are talking about what are more effective teaching practices.
Long time I haven't seen you.
I've been traveling since July 1st. This is my first time home.
Some of them
For 5 months, I was basically gone.
Oh wow.
I don't have my cards, but I don't know if I can give you yours and then I can email you.
Moving from speaking, this sort of chalk and talk to these sorts of things.
Oh, okay.
But
seems
this one I
to
made for QA
be associated
I'm doing an
with
evaluation,
this, right? And that I'm thinking of the policymakers, right, where you have to really condense, you have to really condense and say, this, if you take your PD system in this way, you are likely to have these sorts of things, and so I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of bring formality.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Another thing for the longer term, I think I want to get excited about both the transversal and the subject.
Yes, thank you.
Energetic grace.
And you are an invaluable resource for me. Like for the past 2.5 years, it's been No, I mean, Sarita's made everything that I like. She's just been part and parcel of every step for me of learning.
The Ecuadorian or Kyrgyz curriculum. I'm excited about the work here are opportunities.
And I'm getting a lot of my ideas from your experiences and then meeting with clients. I have an idea.
And we do that in the U.S., right? So where we understand the context a little bit more. But that's actually several. Actually, our very first MTP was in language and literacy and the coaching intertwined. And the MTP in Virginia. And partly it's just when we go into these new contexts, we don't have that kind of knowledge to be able to map those clearly. But as Sarita said, we're in Ecuador now. We're starting to figure out how to build that in, so it feels like it's integrated in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think this Virginia
that's what I want to like have in place with these
state curriculum.
No. And then I want to give them
So we imposed, we developed developmentally appropriate curricula to map those onto. So yeah, so
absolutely no.
Other
I mean, I think that.
That's what I'm
transversal is the right place
that's what I'm going to be working on, I guess.
Start, right? I think there's a natural sequence where you have these
then I will continue to work with them on that.
Learn to employ first, and then like part 2 is okay. So now you're
make sure that they're out there and there's
lower secondary school math.
We might only do
what does this look like?
How do you bring it in?
Right, because we don't have that much in the way.
But that scale of teacher research.
But even something.
Yeah, because the other thing is that in some of the work we do where we're introducing just more child-centered activating, et cetera, that's perceived as a curriculum number 2, right? You might have already said that. And so that's what teachers feel burdened with.
Like
I've already got the textbook, which is the curriculum, and then I've got this thing I have to learn also. Which one do you want?
That's right.
I remember the teacher asking me that from
Well, and what we know, I mean, Doug Clements and I talk about this all the time. I don't know if you know his work in math, but like they have this drop, right? So you have this clear when you put it when you're like try this new thing. You have this drop in quality, this drop in implementation, because so knowing that that's part of the like process, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I don't do anything well. But then how do you get people to come back?
drop in NAEP scores in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right.
After the Common Core, you're like, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I teach
Yeah.
this? Yeah. So
Well, it was only a small drop, but it was a drop.
But still,
It was a failure to continue to
Right.
the upward trajectory. Yeah, so it's,
¿Sabes cuánto era el
hopefully
niño
it's
que
a
pusieron?
small drop, getting ready for.
But even just recognizing that that's part of the learning, you know, even when we want to learn and do new things, there is a drop in our ability to do them well.
Lo pusieron en la ponencia PowerPoint.
I gotta run. Great to see you again.
Okay, nice meeting you.
How much time per course? In other words, we've got 45 minutes intervals for teaching math with grade 3 and then
I'll tell you now.
and a class size, it almost doesn't matter class sizes, right? From 6 to 30 to 47 to 73. Within that time frame, teachers perceive that just like you said.
Right. It's very limited. And we try to remind them all the time to remind the coaches to tell the teachers you can't fix everything. They get overwhelmed. This kid didn't have breakfast. That other kid, the dad, I don't know, went to jail, and and the teacher's like super burdened.
Right.
And on top of that, we're asking them to so just remember what we can do, what's in our hands,
what's manageable.
And
we just have to run. We have to go. Good to see you. So nice to meet you.
La verdad es que estábamos invitando a Norbert y a Oz para que vengan, pero al final nunca quedamos en un día y nosotros, pero la verdad que estamos muy interesados. O sea, este día fue raro para nosotros, porque siempre son un poco más economistas, pero
cuando ustedes tengan tiempo y demás, hagamos la parte economista.
Sí.
Porque, o sea, creo que algo también súper interesante es cómo se diseñó la muestra, los métodos que usaron, la actualización.
No, yo creo que estamos muy interesados porque además nosotros estamos, o sea, mientras estamos trabajando en esto, en unos cuantos de los proyectos, estamos intentando convencerlos de hacer, o sea, una aleatorización del programa y demás. Nosotros lo que estamos haciendo es desarrollando un nuevo instrumento en vez de class, porque no sé, por muchas de las cosas, o sea, cuando uno hace factor análisis con class en algunos de nuestros países,